The rain tapped a gentle, almost secretive rhythm against the window pane of our small Chicago apartment. It was a Tuesday, the kind of evening that folded into itself, unremarkable, soft at the edges. My husband, David, was at the kitchen table, a pool of lamplight isolating him in a world of spreadsheets. I, Chloe, was curled on the sofa, a book resting and read in my lap, content in the quiet symphony of our shared silence. We had been married for 7 years, and our life was a good one. It was built on a foundation of deep friendship, inside jokes whispered in the dark, and a comfortable, predictable rhythm. We were happy. At least, I thought we both were. But that night, watching the rain trace paths on the glass, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't a sound, but a stillness within David's usual focus. I glanced over. His fingers were still on the laptop keyboard, but his gaze was fixed on the middle distance, on the rivulet of water snaking down the window. His face, usually so open and easy for me to read, was a closed door. There was a weight there, a gravity I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps he had just become exceptionally skilled at hiding it. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked, my voice cutting softly through the hum of the refrigerator. He blinked, the spreadsheet pixelating back into focus for him. A smile appeared, but it was his polite smile, the one he used for telemarketers or distant acquaintances. "Oh, just this quarterly report." "It's a monster," he said, his voice light, rehearsed. I nodded, accepting the answer. But the seed was planted. In the days that followed, I became an archaeologist of my own marriage, sifting through the layers of our normalcy for fragments of something hidden. I noticed the way he'd linger in the shower, the water running long after the heat was gone. I saw the new crease between his eyebrows when he thought I wasn't looking. Our conversations, once flowing and expansive, began to have tiny, almost imperceptible dams in them, topics he'd gently deflect, questions answered with a vague, "I'm just tired, Chloe." The quiet wish, though I didn't know to call it that yet, began to breathe in the spaces between us. It was in the way he'd sometimes look at the city skyline from our fire escape, not with appreciation, but with a kind of longing, as if the skyline itself was a cage. It was in the sigh he'd let out when we made comfortable plans for a comfortable future, the 401k, the maybe someday cabin up in Wisconsin, the reliable, sensible sedan we talked about upgrading to. The breaking point, or rather, the point of fracture that let the light in, came a month later. We were at a backyard barbecue at his brother's place in the suburbs. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal and citronella. Laughter clattered around us. David was in the middle of it, flipping burgers, telling a story about a work mishap, the life of the party. And then, in a quiet moment as he brought me a drink, his hand brushed mine. His skin was cool despite the heat, and when I looked up, his eyes were glassy, far away. "You okay?" I murmured. "Yeah," he said, the smile snapping back into place. "Just, all this. It's great, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement he was trying to convince himself of. That night, driving home, the silence in the car was no longer comfortable. It was dense, pressurized. I stared at his profile, illuminated by the dashboard's green glow. The man I knew better than anyone felt like a stranger navigating an unseen map. "David," I said, the word feeling too loud for the car. "What's going on with you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might pretend not to have heard me. Then, softly, he said, "I don't know." "You can tell me anything. You know that, right?" "I know," he whispered. But he didn't speak again until we were home, the apartment dark and echoing. We got ready for bed, the routine feeling like a pantomime. Just as I was about to give up, to roll over and swallow my fear, he spoke into the darkness. "Do you ever feel trapped?" he asked, his voice barely a breath. My heart stuttered. Trapped by what? By all of it. The right job, the right life, the next logical step, the 5-year plan. Do you ever feel like you're living a life that was pre-approved, and you forgot to want something else? The question hung in the air, vast and terrifying. This wasn't about a bad day at work. This was about the bedrock. "What do you want, David?" I asked, my own voice trembling. He turned to face me. In the faint light from the street lamp, I could see the raw, unguarded truth in his eyes. It was terrifying and beautiful. "That's just it," he confessed, a tear escaping down his temple and into his hairline. "I don't know. And I'm so ashamed of that. I have you. I have a good job. I have everything I'm supposed to want. But there's this quiet wish. It's not for another person, or a different life with different people. It's for a different version of me. One I buried a long time ago because it wasn't practical, because it seemed silly." He began to talk then, in a hesitant, broken stream. He talked about the boy who used to spend hours sketching elaborate fantasy maps instead of doing homework, the teenager who wrote pages of terrible poetry about the ocean he'd never seen, the young man who dreamed of building something with his hands, something real and tangible, not just moving digital money from one column to another. He spoke of a yearning for creation, not just consumption, for impact, not just income. He felt, he said, like he was slowly turning into a ghost in his own life, watching a competent, successful stranger live it for him. My quiet wish, he finally said, the term giving shape to the formless ache, is to remember what it feels like to be truly alive, not just comfortable, not just safe. The confession didn't shatter our world, it dissolved the invisible barrier that had been slowly erected within it. I wasn't hurt. I was heartbroken for him, for the years he'd carried this alone. And in that heartbreak, a fierce, protective love roared to life. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, holding his hand. Because I loved you too much to risk it, he admitted. I was terrified that if I started pulling on this thread, the whole tapestry of our life would unravel. I didn't want to lose you for a feeling I couldn't even name. What happened next wasn't a dramatic montage. It was slow, deliberate, and often frightening. The quiet wish was now out in the open, and it demanded to be fed. We started, as all things do in the modern age, with research, but not for a new car. We researched online courses in woodworking and design. We watched documentaries about artisans and creators instead of our usual sitcoms. We began taking weekend drives out of the city, not to fancy brunch spots, but to rural hardware stores and lumberyards. The smell of sawdust, David discovered, was a more potent tonic for his soul than any cocktail. He started small, a simple birdhouse on our tiny balcony, the hammer blows echoing defiantly in our concrete neighborhood. It was lopsided. The roof didn't quite align, but when he held it, covered in primer, his hands stained with paint and wood glue, he looked more present than he had in years. He looked real. Then came the harder part. The wish needed space. Literally. We lived in a 700 square foot apartment. His dream needed a workshop. After months of savings and difficult conversations, we made a decision that felt insane to our families and friends. We decided to leave Chicago. We found a small, worn-down house just outside a little town in Michigan. It had a dilapidated garage. To everyone else, it was a money pit. To David, it was a cathedral. The move was chaos. It was saying goodbye to a life that looked perfect on paper. It was explaining to our parents, who worried about our stability. It was me quitting my own comfortable marketing job to freelance remotely, the uncertainty a constant knot in my stomach. We were trading security for possibility, and some days, the weight of that trade was crushing. David's transformation was physical, gritty. His soft accountant's hands grew calloused. His clean-shaven face often bore a dusting of sawdust. There were failures, a table leg that splintered, a cabinet door that refused to hang straight, months where money was so tight we lived on beans and rice. The quiet wish was no longer quiet, it was the screaming demand of a second job, the ache of muscles unused for decades, the frustration of a learning curve that seemed vertical. But I witnessed something else, too. The hollow look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a fatigue that was satisfied, earned. The polite smile was gone, traded for a grin that was sometimes weary, but always genuine. He began to talk with me again, not past me, excitedly brainstorming designs, lamenting a mistake, celebrating a tiny, hard-won victory. The man I fell in love with, the dreamer, was returning, but now he had the tools, literally and metaphorically, to build his dreams into reality. One evening, about 2 years after our move, I brought a cup of coffee out to the garage. It was winter, and he had a small space heater going. He was putting the final touches on a rocking chair, a beautiful, elegant thing made from reclaimed cherry wood. He wasn't aware I was there. I watched as he ran his hand along the smooth arm, his touch not checking for flaws, but communing with the creation. His face was calm, utterly absorbed. In that moment, he wasn't an accountant, or a husband, or a homeowner behind on repairs. He was an artist. He was himself. He saw me and smiled, that easy, true smile that once again reached his eyes. What do you think? It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, I said, meaning so much more than the chair. The quiet wish he hid from me didn't just transform him, it transfigured us. Our love was no longer just a shelter from the storm, it became the very foundation on which we were brave enough to build new, authentic lives. It deepened in a way I never thought possible. We weren't just partners in comfort anymore, we were allies in creation, in risk, in the messy, glorious work of becoming. David's small workshop, Second Growth Creations, now has a waiting list. He still does some freelance accounting to pay the bills, but his heart is in the wood. And me, I discovered my own quiet wish in the upheaval, a talent for writing I'd neglected. I started documenting our journey, our honest, messy, transformative journey, online. It resonated deeply. That's why I'm sharing this true story with you. Not because we have it all figured out. We don't. But because someone out there might be lying in the dark next to the person they love most, holding a quiet wish of their own, terrified that giving it voice will destroy everything. It might. But it might also transform everything into something more real, more vibrant, and more true than you ever dared imagine. The quiet wish is not the enemy of a happy life. It is often the whisper of the life you're truly meant to live. The most courageous and loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the people who love you, is to lean in, and listen. And maybe, just maybe, pick up a hammer, and start to build.